All right, in Matthew chapter 26, we shift gears a little bit, and Jesus is now going to start preparing his disciples for his death. So previously we've been looking a lot at some of his teachings, but now, and this is a real long chapter, so settle in for this one. Now Jesus is going to talk about the Passover. He's going to talk about his death and resurrection, and things are going to start moving in that direction as we wind up the book of Matthew. So in verse 2, Jesus said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days the Passover is coming, and the Son of Man," and again that was a nickname for himself, the Son of Man, Jesus, "will be delivered up to be crucified." Now, by the way, in verse 3, we see another scene unfolding, and it's this other scene in another place where the chief priests, the religious leaders of the Jews, and the elders were coming together, plotting to find out how they could crucify, how they could kill Jesus. And we're going to see in this long chapter, we're going to see both of these scenes eventually converging at the end of the chapter. In the next section, Jesus gets anointed by this regular person, just this regular woman who took expensive perfume and anointed Jesus with the perfume. And Jesus said, "In pouring this ointment on my body, she has done it to prepare me for burial." So again, Jesus is pointing them toward his crucifixion, which they still didn't fully understand was going to happen to him. Then back to the other scene where Judas betrays Jesus to the high priests and decides that he's going to sell him out for 30 pieces of silver. Then we move to this Passover scene, and the Passover was a special Jewish meal, the special tradition that was connected to all of that stuff that happened back in Exodus when Moses delivered the Israelites from Egypt. And we're going to see that Jesus is going to redefine that age-old story, and Jesus now is going to become the new Passover lamb. So in verse 26, when they're taking the bread, which was this unleavened bread that was representative of this Passover meal, he broke the bread and he gave it to his disciples. And look at what he said, "Take and eat, this is my body." And what he was saying is, I don't want you to think of this the way you used to think of this. I am now fulfilling what that whole story was about. Moses helped to deliver the Israelites from oppression in Egypt, and I'm about to deliver anyone who would believe in me. I'm about to deliver them from the oppression of sin. And so he gave new meaning to this age-old ritual. And this is why Christians today, when we take the Lord's Supper or communion, we remember that we're taking the bread of Christ, the body of Christ, and dipping it in the blood, which was all pointing toward what for us happened 2,000 years ago, and for the disciples is just about to happen. And then the Passover meal is over and they go for a walk. They go through the Mount of Olives where Jesus warns Peter that he's going to deny him. You can read that. And then they go to the Garden of Gethsemane where Jesus begins to pray. And look at the prayer of Jesus. He said, "My Father," he's talking to God the Father. He says, "If it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." And what a great model for us for prayer. We give God our anxieties, but at the end of the day, we say, "I trust you and I submit to your will." And then in the next section, Jesus is betrayed. Judas comes and betrays him for those 30 pieces of silver, and Jesus gets arrested. And now the two scenes merge, and Jesus now is brought before Caiaphas and the high priest and the other elders and religious leaders. And it says in verse 59 that the chief priests and the whole council were seeking false testimony against Jesus that they might put him to death. And then the chapter ends with Peter denying Jesus 3 times, and famously he did this before the rooster crowed. Now I know that's a long chapter, but as you read it, pay attention to how these two scenes merge. Jesus and his disciples, and then the religious establishment, and they're trying to trap Jesus, and they think that they've won. But Jesus knows all along that this was God's plan. This is exactly what he wanted because Jesus came to save the world. So you're ready to read chapter 26, and we'll see you tomorrow for chapter 27.